Hello everyone, welcome to this Blender tutorial. In this tutorial series I'm going to show you how to create a futuristic heads-up display very similar to that created by Andrew Price in a After Effects tutorial from VideoCopilot. And I'm going to put the link to that original tutorial in the description as always. And you can find the source footage for the tutorial also on the VideoCopilot site. Now, first of all, let me give you some words on the overall approach for this kind of project. As you can see here, for the completed heads-up display, you want to have different elements that, like this incoming missile writing right here, the raster, and this kind of waveform, and they all animate differently and move around to add a sense of complexity to this heads-up display and make it look better. And there's already a great tutorial series on how to create simple elements for this kind of heads-up display. It's from BlendBend, and I'll put a link to these tutorials also into the description. So, because the basic compositing principle repeats for all the elements mostly, I will focus on these kind of rings that are sort of a targeting element of the heads-up display in the first tutorial part. Then on creating this raster that you see in the foreground, because that will work slightly differently from all the other elements when it comes to adding this kind of depth of field like blur that's more blurred in the foreground and gets sharp around his face. And in the third part of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to add this green lighting, and you can see it in this here blue light effect to make it look like these elements of the heads-up display actually cast some sort of light onto his face. Now let's head into Blender. First of all, we're going to use the Blender internal render engine, and I've set the frame rate to the frame rate of our source footage. I will realign the camera so it's along the Z-axis about 4 units. And then I'm going to set our source footage as a background image. Add background image just for camera view. I want a movie clip. Don't camera clip, so deactivate this. And open our file. Let me see how it looks. And you can see we have the source footage visible from our camera view. And we can use that to set our frame length. And the last frame seems to be 121. I hover over the timeline and press E to set this as the end frame. Now on to our first element, which is going to be the targeting device or targeting help that is simply some circles around his eyes. Shift A to add a mesh, and I'll add a circle. Fill type nothing is okay. And I want to scale this down. And just for the rest of the tutorial, this ground plane here, we will assume that his face is where this ground plane is, or the elements should be So this first circle that we are creating, we're going to say this is the closest plane to his face, and the other elements are going to be closer to the camera along the z-axis. Let me quickly make this circle thicker so we can actually see it. I press E to extrude and then immediately escape before I move anything, and then I simply scale it up. And we have this as a element. I will now add a material for this. I will call this blue. Simply give it a blue color like this and make it shadeless. And I'm going to name this element instead of circle, main ring, because we want another ring that kind of rotates outside of this or on the inside. I haven't made up my mind yet. Let me first of all shift the cursor to the selected, add another circle, scale it down. I'm gonna say I'm gonna add another element that rotates on the outside. I deselect everything, hit C for circle selection, and actually let me abort this and add some E to extrude, escape, and now scale it up so we have a little bit more depth to this element. Deselect everything, and now with circle select I'm going to select these and maybe this and hit, might be a bit too much, deselect with shift left clicking, and that could be okay. I press escape to exit the circle selection mode, X to delete these let's say the vertices, and I'll also add the blue material to this. And while I'm at it, I want the blue to be transparent for about 0.6. I give it a quick render, and as you can see we still have this gray background, so I will quickly switch the render settings from shading, render settings, shading, sky. Instead of sky I will use transparent, and now we have our element in front of a transparent background. Now this I'm going to call outer ring, and if you can make this more and more complex however you like, but we always want the outer ring move along with the inner ring. So right now that's not the case, so we select the outer ring, shift select the inner ring, and hit Ctrl P to parent the object. And now if we move one, the other moves as well. I select both, hit Shift D to duplicate them, and Z so I move them up on the Z axis. and another one. And then check from camera view how this plays out. Could get even closer to the camera. And this one as well. That looks about okay. I select one of the outer rings and rotate them around the Z-axis by pressing RZ. So the starting positions of these rings are differently on each of the ring elements. Now, of course, they don't move around, they don't do really anything. But before we fix that, let us quickly get the basic compositing done. We want view, node editor, use nodes. I want a backdrop. We see our render it again to get our elements. We also want our movie clip as an input, and with a simple color alpha over node we get this in front of our video, but of course you can see it's misplaced. That's because our video is not scaled to the render size. Relative render size. So I added a scale node. You can find them under distort. Pressing Shift A to get the add menu. But that still doesn't look really good because those elements are all sharp. And as I see the material now, I could probably lower the opacity of I'm in the wrong view. I want default and 3D view right here. So the opacity of the string material, I can lower it further, let's say 0.3. Let's see how this plays out. Yes, looks much nicer. I'm going to bring up the main element, or the first element of our targeting help a little bit, just to make it look like it's not completely on his face. And right now I noticed the other ring elements aren't following our first element, and it will be much easier to handle later on if they do. So we select the outer one, shift select the middle one, and shift select the last one, always the inner rings, because the outer rings are already parented to the inner rings and will follow. And then we hit Ctrl P to make all those rings apparent for the parent them to the first ring, and you can see they move around nicely. Let's move this down. Cursor to selected. Or no, let's actually get it back to the center. And now, in order to get the blur effect, we are going to use a defocus node, so to make it appear that the camera is focused on the actor's face and things that are closer to the camera will be out of focus. But to do that we need to set a focus point, and to do that exactly in the origin point I add an empty, and I'm going to name this focus. Oops. Focus, and select the camera, and under camera data set the depth of field focus point to focus. Now back in the, no, actually not, we need one more thing. For the defocus node to work, we need a the Z path right here under render layers. Passes must absolutely be selected, it must be present. And now with our rendering we add a filter, defocus, connect the Z node and use Z buffer. Of course, let me see. Yes, we have to select use Z buffer, and the f-stop is extremely high, and we will get more blur effect the lower the f-stop is. Let me set it to 24. Now we can see a little bit. Let's say 15. I'm going to set the max blur higher, and let me quickly deactivate preview. For some reason the most outer point ring isn't blurred as much. How about 5? Ah yeah. 5 is way too much. 1 of course, also way too much. Let me reactivate the preview mode. Maybe I have in the 3D view, I have to check that. Ah, of course. Our top element is inside the camera, and that completely screws up the computation of the focus. So make sure that this element is not inside of our actual camera. Because that will screw things up. And now we get this out of focus effect. And to make it the change a bit of the perspective, we might go ahead and set this to maybe 40 millimeters. If you change the focal length of your lens, you will get different effects, and I'd say I stay with 40. Now on to the really interesting part. We want these elements to follow his eye movement first of all, and then we want the outer rings to rotate randomly. To make them follow his eye movement, we're going to switch to the movie clip editor. Open our movie clip, and in tracking mode with control left click, place a marker, and this might be even already a good point to track the corner of his eye. Let me check that quickly by pressing Ctrl T. No, apparently not. Back to the first frame, so maybe we need a little bit more. Try it again, Control Track. No. For some reason the tracker doesn't really like following this. Let's check the tracker settings for this one. Let's say previous frame instead of fastest, instead of keyframe match, and see how that tracks. No, not better. Then we might try a different point. Maybe it will be able to follow this shining point in his eyes. So, and Control T. Whoa! It tracked through, but completely badly. It jumps for some reason. It jumps immediately away from the point that we want to track to his eyebrow for some reason. Maybe a smaller search area. Control T. This is harder than I actually thought to track, strangely enough. No, not this. Let me see by Alt right arrow if I can track. No such luck. This is giving me a real headache right now. There have been, since I tried this last time, there has been a update of Blender, and as well the tracker has been updated, and I don't know, for some reason this does not work anymore. Huh. shine in his eye is not a good point because of his eye movement. Huh. You know what, let me quickly check the last tracker settings that I used. This is getting ridiculous. Delete track. I will open an older version of Blender and quickly check up on HUD movie clip editor. What did I track last time? I tracked the corner of his eye and I used not masking mode, tracking mode, and I used previous frame fastest. I don't really get why it's not working anymore. The same tracking settings I used, but a newer version of Blender, and all of a sudden things don't work anymore. What's wrong here? The newer version is supposedly made the tracker better, but I'm not feeling it. From here it starts to work. Track forward like that. It's not perfect, but it will work to make our elements roughly follow his eye movement. What a stress. Okay, so we have this element, this tracker, and we change to reconstruction mode. Reconstruction link empty to track. This will now have created a new empty, and if we select the first inner ring, shift select our empty and hit Ctrl P, we will now see that the rings all follow his eye movement roughly. Now onto the outer rings. I select one and insert a rotation keyframe and do the same for the other ones. Rotation. Then I switch to the graph editor. Outer ring, and I want the set rotation. Press N to bring up this menu. Add a modifier and add noise. Let's say scale of 10, and let me check how this turns out in the animation. It's just waddling a bit up and down, so we have to increase the strength to, let's say, 4. Let's see how that turns out. Even more. By the way, I'm doing this by Control, and with the middle mouse button I can scroll this view right here. That looks okay from the movement range, but it's way too fast, so I will double the scale again. That looks okay. Oops. And now the nice thing is I can simply click here to copy the modifiers, select this one, set rotation, and paste the modifiers, and just change the phase to 30 to get a different curve. And the same thing for this one right here. And let's say here a phase of 15. And now in the 3D view we can see these elements rotating all differently and following his eye movement. That's all for part 1. And I hope you learned something. Sorry for that little trouble with the tracker. I honestly don't know what happened or why it didn't track anymore. And see you next time. Goodbye.